Welcome to the Expansive CEO podcast. I'm your host, Hannah Chapman, founder of Expansive CEO and X Squared Wealth Planning. Buckle in as we explore how to create true prosperity and build a business and a life that expands beyond yourself and makes a dent in the universe. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Expansive CEO podcast. I am your host, Hannah Chapman, and I have a wonderful, wonderful guest here today. Her name is Amy Collette, and she is known as the Book Alchemist. And she is the founder of Positively Powered and Unleash Your Inner Author, where she helps impact-driven entrepreneurs really get that book that's been, rolling around in your heart and your head for so long, helps get that out onto the page so that a little piece of you that's you've been holding inside can actually be let out. So, Amy, thank you so much for being here today. Tell us more about you.
Yeah, Hannah, thank you for inviting me on, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you. I think you put it beautifully. My job and my calling is really to help people who have usually been carrying their book around in their head or their book ideas for a long time, knowing that it can impact other people, right? Knowing that it can help solve a problem or help people see a possibility that they have been able to see because they've been stuck or in a hard place. So this is my joy to be able to bring those books to the world and actually help the author make this awesome transformation from a writer to a published author. And that whole process that happens, it's really a blossoming and a becoming. And then to have that also available for their readers, or what I call their soulmate readers, the people who really, really need to hear their message.
Mm. Yeah, it's such a tender thing, and I can kind of like relate from the standpoint of, have always having so much to write. I've always had so much to say. And I'll share a little anecdote. I don't know if I've told this story before on the podcast. But I, from the time I was very little, would write books, and I would staple, right? I would get like pages from like a legal pad, and then I would staple them together to make my own little books. And I think I was about 7 years old. I wrote a book about killer tomatoes that overgrew in the garden. And they took over, and a little girl had to, save the day. So I wrote this whole story, and my mom did the illustrations for me. She was such a beautiful artist. Get a dress, so she drew these illustrations for me, and we packaged it up and sent it off to a publisher. And I never heard anything back, and I was very sad.
Oh, so can I ask what was so compelling to you at such a young age to have a book and to be an author, to have the other people experience your book?
I don't, let's see. Let me see if I can feel into that. Um, what's coming up is that I have always felt like I had a lot to say. Like that's especially like that young, right? Like it just felt like there was such a bubbling up of ideas. And when I was in elementary school, actually, a couple of grades that I was in, we had the ability to like type. So I started kindergarten in 1989. And so we were like the first class where there were computers in the classroom, and we were like using them. And so we were able to type and then do like binding, right? And so like put it in, and at the library they would put it in and then bind it for us into the. So I have so many of these little tiny books that I wrote, and I wrote a ton of poetry when I was little. And it was like there was just so many ideas, almost exactly what you're talking about. So many ideas, so many things in my head and my heart that just like needed to get out.
Yeah.
And I would just write and write and write. And even now, so today, at 39, almost 40, I've written a lot of articles and blogs and different things that are published in all kinds of different places. I've written a chapter for a multi-author book, and still there's like that feeling of there's a book, right? Where's my book, my
Yeah.
big book, the big one, and probably more than one, right? And so that feeling, I think a lot of entrepreneurs can um, identify with that feeling of like, I don't know what it is, but there's just that pull. There's the all the words that want to come out of my soul.
Right. Right. Almost everybody I talk with has more than one book idea because almost nobody, regardless of age, even when you were 7, you had more than enough to say, right? You had tons and tons of content and ideas and curiosity and this desire to connect through your writing with other humans.
Mm,
Right? That's what's so touching about books, especially when little kids write them. I mean, it's like, I have these things to say. I want somebody to listen. I want to connect that way. And as adults, we have that same thing too. So then, what part of the challenge is figuring out, okay, where do I start with that content? Do I start? I often see this. Do I start with the book I should write
mm.
or the book of my heart? you know,
Yeah.
and so that's often a conundrum I see people, and it can keep people staying in inertia for a long time because they're like, oh, do I write this book? Do I write that book? They're staying in that confusion. And when you're in that state of confusion, it's really difficult to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so what I love this difference between, because I see this in myself too, right? Like you're talking straight to me. The sense of like, okay, do I write a book about the thing that I am an expert in, right? Which is financial planning and how, like all of that stuff. Or do I write from my heart? Or is it actually something that combines the two, right? Like how do you see that, or how does that show up for clients when you're working with people?
Okay, Hannah, I want to use you as an example, right? Because
Okay.
you're the perfect example, really, because you have this podcast where you talk about way more than just financial planning, right? You bring in your whole self and others' whole selves too. You dabble in the spiritual, and you bring in human design, and you bring in all these different aspects because we're whole people. We're not just what we do.
Hmm.
It's not who we are, right? It's a small part of who we are, and it may express some aspect of that. But that's what's so beautiful about a book. Like you may go on stage and give a short talk, right? A 20-minute talk. Okay, you can cover a lot of ground in 20 minutes, but you're not going to be giving a lot of backstory or a lot of history, that kind of thing. In your book, you can do that. Okay, so that's where, I bring in a lot of the aspects that I use to help people make these decisions, right? And I had a client just recently call it a decision filter. I
Mm,
never thought of it that way. I think of it as this sort of matrix where you kind of put all these things that are woven together, like your mission. So your mission for your book, but also, you just talked about how we might be talking about our bigger mission, like what is our calling in life? What is our purpose? So we talk about your mission. We talk about who's going to read this book. Who do you most want to serve? And then what are your goals as an author? So this question particularly goes to who do you want to serve?
mm,
And your mission, right? So if you think about, well, I want to write something that is relevant to my business, but also brings in all these other aspects of me. Okay, the next question is, how does that serve your readers? And so if I make the analogy back to your podcast, your podcast listeners want all that, right?
mm,
They don't want just financial planning advice from Hannah. They want this bigger, more rich, more deep conversation with you and other people, right? So that's what you can think about with your book too is, how do I have that connection with the humans I most want to be with? What do they need? What do I need? What brings us, what serves us all?
Mm. Yeah, that's so true. And it's interesting when you bring in that because like that's one of the reasons that I created the Expansive CEO podcast in the first place, right? Was that I just would have the most awesome conversations with people. And almost every time we would be like, oh my gosh, we should have recorded that. That was some good stuff.
Right.
Like we're
Right.
like really, really vibing. And so yeah, the podcast was really born out of that desire just to capture these beautiful conversations that I would have with people about, you know, about their businesses, about life, about consciousness, about, the role of money and prosperity in their world, right? Like all of those things.
Yeah.
And it's so much bigger than financial planning or business finance, right? Like that's a it's I see that from the way you put it, I see that as my healing modality in the
Mm,
world, right? Like that's or the vehicle that I
right.
use to help facilitate healing um in a lot of ways, right? Like there's just a lot that happens around money. Um and security and safety, right? That's all tied up with money. That all of those feelings are like a big knot all together. Uh,
Right.
until
Right.
we start to open up and look at them and see what's there, um, both on a practical and an energetic level, all of it.
Right. So how does that idea land for you in terms of thinking about your book ideas?
Oh, well, you know what's funny, even thinking about like back to when I was 7, um, it feels like there are just a lot of them. Right? Like there probably are, there are different books and workbooks and um yeah, just the different pieces of me or the different things that matter, the different stories that I have to share from childhood or adolescence or, even adulthood, right? Building a business, all of these things are different parts that
Yeah.
probably weren't their own story. Um but that from thinking from that perspective, like what's next, what's the journey that you take people on from that space? Like I don't know about human design. I'm also a manifesting generator, right? There's like so many ideas.
Yes, yes. And I can relate because I am also a manifesting generator.
Yeah. And you know what's really beautiful is that I can do this for other people too, right? I can help other people like harness in and focus their ideas, but then I do need someone else to then help me harness in and focus my
Yes.
ideas.
Yeah, I find the same thing. I find the same thing because that's part of what I do, and maybe that's the magic, is that I know people need that because of my being a manifesting generator and having a million ideas all the time. And some people call it shiny object syndrome, but it's really just a curious mind who that's you're just interested in a lot of things, and you can apply your wisdom and insight to a lot of different things, and then just keep adding to it. And that's what's exciting to me. But to answer your question about where do you start, those are the places I start, because I think so many people try to sit in a room and think, I have all these ideas, I have all this experience, I should be able to just sit and write a book. We all have that idea that somehow we just know how to write a book. But like anything, if you haven't done it before, I make the comparison to building a house. You don't just sort of get some materials together and start whacking them together, right?
Ideally
you have,
not. Yeah.
you have some forethought, you have some design in mind, right? You have some plans and a schedule and that kind of thing. And so really I approach book writing from the same standpoint. So those things that I just talked about, figuring out, that's where we start. We don't start with, let's sit down and write 10,000 words. right? Let's talk first about what our goals are and what we really want to accomplish here. So we talked about your mission. And I have a whole series of questions that I take you through to really get it down to a defined something that's almost a book description. You can say, this is what the book is about. And then you really define your readers. And for business people, it's often your ideal client. And that ideal client may be changing. It may have, just with as businesses grow and as people expand and transform, so do their ideal audiences. And so we define that. I call it your soulmate audience because it's the people that you really connect with, that you want to serve the most. And then what are your goals? Do you want to build your business? Is it just you kind of want to leave it as a legacy and not do a lot more work around it? Or do you want to be out there speaking? You want to do workshops and courses and all the things, that your book is a centerpiece. I call it a part of your ecosystem.
Mm.
And then from all of that, you get a tremendous amount of information from those three clarity pieces. And then you take those and you plug them in, and it becomes, in my system, it becomes your roadmap or your detailed outline. So now you've got a map for yourself to follow, and it's also a map for your readers to follow in the book. It's organized in a way that flows and makes sense for them, gives them the information they need first to connect with you as the author. And then, the stories and the whatever else you're going to do in your book flow beautifully from that to meet your goals that we defined up front. So it's a beautiful system that all kind of works together. And then the writing really flows much more easily once you have the clarity. And when you sit down to write, you know who your ideal reader is, your soulmate reader. So you're writing to them.
Mm. Oh, such a good point. And it's interesting that you bring that up because it's like I have found myself mentioning that a lot lately, as far as, even if you can serve a lot of people,
Mm,
who's the one that you want to speak to, right?
yeah.
Who's that ideal client that you can, the way I describe it is like pour everything out and they can receive it, right? That's someone who is available to receive from you in the way that you just naturally can pour out your wisdom and your love and your passion, and just talk to that person, that one person. And then if other people who are close to that ideal client, right, they might hear you too because you're resonating at, or maybe they're like on the trajectory to be that, and you're ringing your tuning fork and they're hearing that and it's coming into their awareness, right? So other people might come to you and be like, "Oh, hey, can you help me as well?" And then you get to respond to that. You get to say yes or no. Um, but when you are like speaking to that one ideal person, it just makes everything more alive and easier for you to,
Yes.
just to talk.
Yes. I love your analogy of the tuning fork because it's that frequency that goes out, right, and touches people. So
Hmm.
I use this analogy in my course of, in marketing, you talk about target market. And I kind of hate that because I don't like the visual of a target, right?
Right.
So I found this visual of concentric hearts, right?
Mm,
And so your ideal soulmate reader is in that very smallest center heart,
mm,
right? But there are other people outside in a larger area that resonate with what you're talking about and need what you're talking about.
hmm.
But if you stay focused on that ideal person in the middle, then you are going to still, ring that tuning fork that's going to reach that wider group, and people that are related or work with them, or all kinds of audiences you might not even originally think of. But if you go in with that more precise uh, definition, then you'll still reach those other people rather than going broad first and trying to reach that person in the middle. It's harder to do.
Yes, yeah, that's such a good visual to put with that. And one of the things I was just thinking about as you were talking, it was kind of like coming up to ask about like what with the purpose, right? The purpose of a book. There are two things that come to mind, and I don't know. Again, does this mean there are like multiple books that I need to write, or is it more um, again inclusive? I have had, for me personally, I've had thoughts around, yes, I would love to use a book as a center of an ecosystem and then to be able to speak, right? Have that be like the part of a keynote, right? And then here's the book and you can learn more and you can
Right.
um, take what you need from it, but also as a way to build or help more, right? Like I think that's the strongest impetus for me is being able to help a wider range of people
Right.
while also, right, like, so this is directing, this is what I do, this is how I help. And this book itself will also be extremely valuable and helpful to someone who like they can do a $30 transformation. They can't necessarily, spend, multi thousands of dollars on, a process or coaching or, financial planning, right? They're not there yet,
Right. Yeah.
but so it's like a lead in. um so yeah, from that perspective, and I think you had an interesting take on this as well, that I'd love for you to share, is like what is the purpose then of the book, and how from your standpoint as a publisher, how is that different from how you see it being utilized elsewhere in the industry?
Yeah. So it definitely is a business builder. It's a credibility thing. It's a visibility. You can talk about your book, and what one of the greatest things that for authors, once they write their book, now they have a book full of content that they can share in other ways, right? On their blogs or in their social media or whatever. As long as they still own the content, own the rights to their content, they can share it however they want. But what I see some folks doing out there, some authors want to do this, but some publishers really push them to just, hey, we're going to crank out a book really fast so that you can check that box that says now I'm an author, because nobody's going to read the book anyway. That kind of attitude, makes my head explode.
I can't imagine putting something out there that I didn't actually want people to read.
Right, exactly. I think that's making some terrible assumptions about our readers, because books, there are so many different kinds of books out there. I mean, there are a lot of financial books out there. There are a lot of self-help books out there. So why are we still writing these books? Because people are looking for them. They're looking for a voice that gets them, that they can resonate with, that comes from a different perspective than they've heard before.
Mm.
And so you can see I get pretty passionate about this because I hate that idea of checking a box because nobody's going to read the book anyway. We're doing this with other people in mind. I mean, so something that somebody told me the other day, they said, oh, so your perfect client is somebody who says, if this book will help one person. And I said, yeah, 90% of my authors say that. If this book can help one person have really make a transformation and change their lives, then it's totally worth it.
Mm.
Whatever work and cost is involved in doing this, that's what I want. I want to have that kind of impact in the world. And of course, it's going to help more than one person, and for an author, imagine the difference of approaching it from I checked the box, now I'm an author, to having a reader that you've never met before come up to you with tears in their eyes and tell you how much your book meant to them. There's nothing like that. It's the ultimate author payoff. Because it's doing a book is a big project, and putting your heart and soul into it will help someone else. But the thing that people don't know about, Hannah, and this is a little secret.
Mm. Good. Spill the secrets.
is that a lot of times authors say, oh, the book is all but written. I just have to get it out of my head and onto the page, right? Well, that's what a lot of people go into it thinking. But when you really are sitting down to tell your backstory and tell some of those stories that might not be all just, rainbows and unicorns, there might be some tough stuff in there. You can come up against some hard barriers. I call them fear dragons,
Mm,
that come, and they're probably what have kept you from writing the book in the first place. And now they're showing up again. And it's your opportunity to work through them this time,
mm,
to really look and examine and work through them. And so there's a total transformation that's going on for you as an author as you're writing your book. And I don't mean to scare anybody away. I mean that to be inviting you into your own transformational path as you're becoming an author with the goal of helping others make a transformation. You will also be growing in ways that you won't be able to predict until you do it.
mm. Yeah, that piece in particular, right? Like the pieces that we tend to keep hidden, right?
Mm-hmm.
That or that we feel shame or guilt around. It's so so interesting, right? When we see other people sharing openly about those things, whether, it's they were sexually assaulted, right, when they were younger, or went through a bankruptcy, or, a really tough divorce, or, they were the one who cheated, right? Something that was hard that they might harbor any of those layers of shame or guilt around. When we share those things and share them in a way to in such a way that it helps people see, oh, I can move past and through this, right? That other people have moved through this pain that I have also experienced, and are thriving, right? Or we can see that they have progressed through it in some way. Like, we need that. We need those stories. We need to see those examples. Um, and I know, like, from my work working with clients, there are so many people, even when we just talking about money, right? There's so much shame and guilt that people will hold around where they're at, or what they have or don't have yet, or their perceived, notion of where other people might be,
Yeah.
where they are in relation to, right? Am I doing better than? I mean, I have clients who have, many hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars that still are scared, or businesses, that have revenues of $1 million a year and still feel shame around what they're not doing, quote unquote, what they're not doing right.
Right.
And it's so important to normalize the fact that everyone is on their own journey. Everyone is going through stuff. Everyone is, well, I said this recently on a post. We're all weird and messy, like all of us, every single one of us. Um, Everyone just has their own brand of weird and messy, right? And to see that, to be able to allow yourself to be seen as, here's my weird, here's my messy, and have other people see that and be like, oh, she's got weird and messy too. And also, right, talks about it. And, you know, it, it's, it's a thing that is really, really needed. And the authenticity of that brings and that fosters, I think is what our society is really crying out for right now.
Yeah. So much I could dig into with this, Hannah. But yeah, I think that's a place where you and I really have a connection and a similarity in our business, is that vulnerability, because people have to get real and have to, they have to get real with themselves first. It's not that we require it, but for them to get to where they need to go in their journey, it behooves them to be vulnerable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I have an author who writes about the elephant in the room. In fact, there's elephants on the cover of her books. Because and that's really a lot of our books, is we're talking about the elephants in the room that everybody's not talking about. Because on social media we're seeing the best and the most beautiful and the happy good times, right? We're not always seeing the behind the scenes, the messy and weird stuff that goes on, or the stuff that's really hard. And so when we decide to share some of those stories, it opens up a door of, as you said, normalcy. It's like we're kind of all messy and weird. So let's talk about that. And let's connect on that, right? I mean, we have that in common. Let's discover that in each other, right? So when we talk about the messy and the weird, and in the case of writing the books, there's a lot of fears that come up. There's a lot of doubt. So there may be shame behind some of the stories that it's an opportunity to work through, and fear of other people's judgment, right? Like you're talking about with your financial stuff. They're thinking, oh, Hannah's going to think I'm way behind, or I've messed up, I've made some poor decisions, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
But we're starting with today. We're starting with, how can we move forward and do something great today, for ourselves and for other people. So it's the book journey is really an interesting thing, and it really is an opportunity to examine some things that maybe you've kept hidden. Like you said, some of those hard things. And no, you don't have to write about all of them. That's not a requirement. It goes back to, does it serve your mission? Does it help your readers? That kind of thing. And, if so, telling your story gives them permission to examine their own stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say it kind of pushes open the door of possibility. So when they're reading your book and they're saying, okay, you've also gone through some hard times. I didn't have any idea. Hannah might have had some issues or things that she's gone through. And now she's on the other side of that. I can see your transformation, right? That gives me the idea that maybe possibility is possible for me. Maybe that kind of transformation
Mm-hmm.
is attainable. What?
Right.
I've really seen that happen with so many of the books that we do, is that it just kind of opens people's minds to, oh, I didn't even know that was possible. That means, who knows what that means for me? Let me figure that out now.
Yes. And that's that's the kind of book, right, that I desire to write and to put out into the world, is something that is I think to the point that you were making before too, like it's not self-serving, that it truly is in service to, right? Like helping others
Right.
and sharing something that will help elicit transformation for others. Um, and my sense is of you that those are the people that you are drawing to your company, right? Or those who want to, like, I want this to be part of my service, as in like the service my heart is here to share with the world. Yeah. So what I want to ask is, especially with Unleash Your Inner Author, because this is your group coaching program, right? That you take people through. What does that look like? So if for someone who's listening and they're like, oh my gosh, yes. And, I think a lot of us entrepreneurs have been approached by people who are like, oh, like we can get your book done in, 90 days or less, that kind of thing, right? Like, let us do all this. And so we're kind of like, I block those things out at this point. I'm like, no, 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 nope, that's not right. But if someone's listening, they're like, oh, this is it. This is how I want to get my book out. What does that look like? And what does, especially the unleash your inner author part, how does that feel for someone to work through?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for asking about that, Hannah. So it's really those first four things I talked about: defining your mission, defining your soulmate reader, understanding who they are and how to talk to them, what they need. And there's a whole series of, of questions and discussion that goes around this. And then who are you as an author? What are your goals, and what are the fears that might come up for you along the way? We talk about that too, just to sort of get those fear dragons out in the open. So we're saying, we see you, we know you might be coming around. And then creating that roadmap. So we do that in a very small group in a 2-day retreat. And it's usually an online retreat, unless people want to fly in and hang out with me, which I love. But we do that in a small group that's very intimate. And then we discuss all these things. And what I see happening in those small groups is that people's ideas, they can see how it resonates with other people and how impactful that might be. And it's just such a supportive and wonderful thing to go through that in that small supportive group. And then you start writing. Once you've got all this stuff figured out, now you've got the clarity to start writing. So we do weekly group coaching after that. So you're writing in the intervening week, and then coming with your, what's gone well, Hannah. What are you getting stuck on? Where are the fear dragons coming up, and what's happening for you? And everybody gets to be in on that conversation too, because what's so helpful then is authors see, oh, I'm not the only weirdo going through this particular thing right now. Or so we celebrate wins, but we also can voice our frustrations and work through those and maybe come up with ways to handle those. And there's an entire course that goes along with this. So everything that I see people struggle with, how do you make enough time? How much time is it going to take?
Mm-hmm.
All the fear dragons that come up: procrastination, perfectionism, all those things that you might encounter along the way are addressed in the course. And also how to tell a really good story.
Mm.
We talked about that because there's an aspect of, how do you tell a good story? If you're not a professional writer, which most of the people I work with are not, we all as humans know how to tell a story. But there's a story, and then there's a story that really draws you in, really grabs you and speaks to your heart, maybe makes you cry or laugh or feel some emotion, right? That's going to help you really connect with your readers in a way that's going to keep them turning the page every time, right? So we learn all those kinds of things, and the goal really is to have your book done in about 90 days. Now that's a first draft of your book. That's not
Mm.
finished with all, the cover and all that stuff. That's a separate process in the publishing. And that's what my Positively Powered Publishing company does. We help you with all of those things. But the goal really is to totally support authors on their journey to write this book and write it themselves. They can do some recording and transcribing. That kind of thing works well for a lot of people, especially speakers, people who love to think on their feet.
Mm-hmm.
That's lovely for. But yeah, the goal is to have a first draft of your book in that time.
Mm.
But I'll say this: not life happens, and that doesn't always work. And people can stay in the weekly coaching as they like to continue and working on their book until it's done.
Well, and then if for anyone who's watching on YouTube, or if you're listening and you want to go see, you have just a ton of books behind you uh,
Yes.
right now with beautiful covers. And so that aspect of the process, then it then shift into positively powered and go in through editing and
Yep.
cover and like all of that. Like, yeah, how long does
Yes.
that usually take?
Yeah. So I have this wonderful publishing team of expert author or editors. Goes through 2 phases of editing. And since you've got done coaching, it's usually your book is in usually pretty good shape by the time it goes to editors, because you've done the work up front to have a good organization and have it flow well. So there's editing, there's cover design, which is always fun and creative. And then there's interior layout too. We call it interior design, but it's not for your house, it's for your book. So you have that look and feel throughout the entire thing. So the cover design kind of informs the rest of the book too, so that it's beautiful, professional, world-class book that, my goal with that is for you to burst into happy tears when you open that first box of books.
Mm. Oh, yes, yes. I love that. So how, like, what's the typical time frame? Or if someone goes through the coaching process and then the editing process, like if you start your book today, like
Yeah.
about how long?
I generally say about 6 months. If you have a shorter time frame than that, we can start some of that design stuff or sooner. There's no reason you can't do a book design while you're writing your book. But I love to have people stay focused on their writing
Mm,
because it takes a lot of brain power. It takes a lot of emotional power. It takes a lot of your energy to focus on that and get that done. So I like to have people just focus on that first, and we'll worry about the other stuff later. It can be a little shorter. It can be much longer than that too, if people, are or just want to take it a little bit slower. But 6 months is very reasonable to have a beautiful, book like one of these behind me
mm,
that you can be super proud of and start selling and using at your talks and really promoting.
mm. And so, do you see people who are maybe active in their business, right? Have other things going on? Um, is that a piece like that you can drop in, right? Do you find that people are okay, right? If they here's how you carve out enough time to do your writing. Like that's instead of here's the thought that comes maybe a fear dragon, right?
Yeah.
Like do I have to go like sequester myself and for 12 weeks and like do nothing else and I've got a business to run. So how do I make that happen?
Yeah, so that's a really great question, Hannah, and one I get asked a lot. So thank you for asking that because I have seen people sequester themselves, not for 12 weeks. That would be such a luxury, right? To just go away and not have anything else to do but write your book. But none of us are like that. We're running businesses, we're doing things, we're traveling, we're raising families, all the things. And so, yeah, it really is a commitment. Your book has to rise honestly to the level of priority that it's motivating you. The book is knocking at the inside of your head, trying to come out. And so, yeah, it does take some planning. It takes some discipline to make the time. And I see people be more successful overall when they be when writing becomes a habit.
Mm,
So that would be a big tip I would give you and to other people who are thinking about writing a book is make writing a habit now before
mm,
you really start writing your book content. What are you writing? Are you journaling every day? Are you doing morning pages? Those morning pages that Julia Cameron
mm,
suggests in The Artist's Way. It's just kind of stream of consciousness, whatever comes to your brain for 3 pages every day. And that
mm,
takes maybe 15, 20 minutes. And so getting in the habit of writing will get you in the habit of being able to feel like you're missing something if you're not writing every day. So
mm.
that when it comes time to write your book, you're really primed. You've done a great service for yourself of getting yourself in the habit. And it sounds like you probably are in that habit already, Hannah. Does that resonate with you?
I move in and out of it. And so,
Uh-huh.
yes, there are definitely times where like there's a lot to write and a lot to say. And then there are times when I'm like more focused on talking or, different, yeah, just different aspects. Again, manifesting generator
Right.
ness. I shift through different things, but I absolutely like have know how can have that writing muscle really primed, right? Or it's there and all it needs to do is just to be reminded like, okay, we're gonna do this every day. And that builds the muscle right back up. The muscle memory is there.
Yeah, yeah. And do you find that it also makes you a stronger writer?
Yes. Yeah. The more just journaling, stream of consciousness for sure. Right. Like that. The first 2 years of my business, with X squared, I primarily wrote every day and posted every day, kind of long form content, and did a lot of writing, for Forbes and for my blog and all that. Right. So it was like lots and lots of writing that also helped hone my voice in a way, right? So that the like figuring out like how I want to talk and how I write more like I talk. Um Kind of, yeah, dusting off where instead of like perfect and formal, like, I'm not actually perfect and formal. I had to relax into that though. I had to work my way there.
Yes. Yeah. Find your voice. And so that's another tip too, is if you're not used to writing in your voice. So this is a little example from my life. When I wrote my first book, The Gratitude Connection, I had been working as a science writer for years, right? And so I was used to writing in some, about someone else's research and how to use it and how to understand it and that kind of stuff. So it wasn't me. It wasn't my voice, from my heart or my perspective even. So it took a bit to find my footing with that. I did a lot of writing, journaling, and just kind of writing what I thought were just articles. I wasn't publishing them at the time. I was just writing this series of articles and kind of helpful practices that might help people. And so those ended up becoming my book. But through that journey, I found my voice because
Mm.
I'd go back later and sometimes I'd read something. I go, wow, that really sounds good. And then I'd turn the page and read something else. And I'd think it's bullet points. It's very procedural, right? Like that's not me. That's not coming from, someone who's going to read this book is going to want and going to be able to connect with. So I had to do a lot of rewriting. So to
Yes.
save yourself that kind of work, start writing now and really get in the habit of and knowing and understanding and liking your own voice.
Mm. So good. That's such a perfect place to end for today. And Amy, if someone is wanting to learn more, what's the best way for them to learn more about you and get in touch with you?
Yes. So I'm on all the socials. You can find me with Amy Collette or Unleash Your Inner Author. And my website is unleashyourinnerauthor.com. And you can schedule a call with me there. I have some free resources for people who are maybe thinking about becoming an author and want to dabble in that a little bit. So I'm happy to talk to people about their ideas and see where they might want to go with that and be able to find some free resources there.
Beautiful. Well, if anyone has any questions, or as always, if you have any thoughts, after listening to this and you want to share, we are more than happy to hear from you. Um, all of Amy's information will be in the show notes as well, so it's super easy to get to. And you can always, interact with us, and tell us what you're taking away, what's resonating, what questions you have, what you want to hear more about. If we need to have Amy on again, to talk more about writing a book, just let me know. I love, love, love responding to, the questions that I get and the things that you want to hear as a listener. So, Amy, thank you again for being here with us, and we will see you all next week. That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening, and be sure to like and subscribe. And again, if anything resonated with you from this episode, I would love to hear from you. Email me at Hannah, HANNAH, at expansiveceo.com and tell me about it. And if you're ready for your greatest expansion, you can find ways to work with me at expansiveceo.com and at x2wealthplanning.com. That's X, the numeral 2, wealthplanning.com. So until next time, remember that there is enough, you are enough, and your birthright in this lifetime is to be expansive.